The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink like someone had spilled juice across the clouds. Leona Carter stood at the edge of the private airstrip, her white apron bright against the dark hangar behind her. She carried a silver tray with fancy glasses filled with cold drinks. Her hands were steady, but her heart beat fast. Around her, men in expensive suits laughed and talked. Their voices bounced off the shiny jet parked on the strip. The jet was huge and white, with windows that sparkled like diamonds. It looked like something from a movie about rich people and their toys. "More champagne over here," someone shouted. Leona walked over carefully. The tray was heavy. The ground was hot beneath her worn shoes. She could feel the heat coming up through the rubber soles, making her feet sweat. "Thank you, sweetheart," one man said without looking at her. He took a glass and turned away, already forgetting she existed. That was normal. Leona was used to being invisible. For 2 years, she had worked as a maid for Richard Hale's company. She cleaned offices. She served drinks at fancy parties. She smiled when people needed her and disappeared when they didn't. But today felt different. Today, something heavy sat in her chest, like a stone she couldn't swallow. "Ladies and gentlemen," a loud voice called out. Everyone turned. Richard Hale stood near the jet stairs, his arms spread wide like he owned the whole world. Maybe he did. He owned 12 companies, 17 mansions, and more jets than Leona could count. Richard was tall with silver hair that shined in the sunset. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Leona made in a year. His smile was big and white, but it never reached his eyes. Those eyes were cold, like winter water. "Today, we celebrate another record year," Richard announced. The crowd clapped. "And to celebrate, I want to have a little fun." The word fun made Leona's stomach twist. When rich people wanted fun, someone usually got hurt. Richard's eyes scanned the crowd. Then they stopped. They landed on Leona. "You there," he said, pointing. "The help. Come here." Leona's throat went dry. Slowly, she walked forward. The tray felt heavier with each step. The crowd parted like the sea, and suddenly she was standing alone in front of Richard Hale. "What's your name?" he asked. "Leona, sir." "Leona," he repeated, tasting the word like it was funny. "Tell me, Leona, have you ever been inside a jet before?" She shook her head. "No, sir." "Of course not," Richard laughed. Some people in the crowd laughed too. "Well, I have an idea. A game, if you will." He turned to the crowd, his voice getting louder. "I will give this young lady a challenge. Leona, if you can fly this beautiful jet, just take it off the ground and land it safely. I will adopt you as my daughter. You'll never have to carry another tray again." The crowd roared with laughter. It crashed over Leona like a wave, making her face burn hot. She wanted to disappear into the ground. "That's cruel, Richard," one woman said, but she was smiling. "It's hilarious," another man shouted. "The maid flying a jet." Richard wasn't done. He walked closer to Leona, so close she could smell his expensive cologne. "What do you think, Leona? Want to try? Or are you happy staying exactly where you belong?" The words cut like broken glass. Leona looked down at her tray, at the empty glasses that shook slightly in her trembling hands. She thought about her tiny apartment with the leaking ceiling. She thought about her mother back home who needed medicine. She thought about bills piled on the kitchen table like mountains she could never climb. But most of all, she thought about her father, who used to lift her onto his shoulders and say, "One day, little bird, you'll fly higher than anyone expects." Her father, who taught flight lessons at the small airport across town. Her father, who died 3 years ago in a plane crash that should never have happened. Leona's jaw tightened. She looked up, straight into Richard Hale's cold eyes. "I know planes, sir," she said quietly. The laughter stopped. The silence felt thick and strange. "What did you say?" Richard asked. "My father was a flight instructor," Leona said, louder now. "He taught me about aircraft when I was little. I know how the controls work. I know what the buttons do. I know." "This is even better," Richard interrupted, clapping his hands. "The maid thinks she can fly. This is priceless. The crowd started laughing again, but this time it sounded nervous, uncomfortable. Then something changed everything. The pilot, a man in a crisp uniform who had been standing near the jet, suddenly grabbed his chest. His face went white. He made a choking sound and fell to his knees. "Paul!" someone screamed. People rushed forward. The pilot collapsed onto the tarmac, his body limp. A woman checked his pulse, while a man shouted into a phone for an ambulance. "Heart attack," the woman said, her voice shaking. "He needs a hospital now." "The nearest hospital is 40 minutes away by car," someone else said. "But the jet! If someone could fly the jet, there's a medical center with a helicopter pad just 10 minutes away by air." Everyone looked at each other. Then, slowly, every eye turned to the gleaming white jet, then to Leona. Richard Hale's face had lost its smile. He looked pale, almost scared. Leona set down her tray. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. She walked toward the jet, her worn shoes clicking on the hot pavement. "Wait," Richard said. "You can't be serious. You're a maid. You can't actually." Leona stopped at the bottom of the stairs. She turned and looked at Richard, at all of them, at their expensive clothes and their shocked faces. "My father taught me something important," she said. "He said, calm hands save lives. Fear is just noise." She climbed the stairs. Behind her, she heard Richard whisper, "Oh, God, what have I done?" The door of the jet closed with a soft click, sealing Leona inside with nothing but her father's voice in her head and a dying man who needed someone, anyone, to be brave enough to fly. The inside of the jet smelled like leather and cleaning spray. Leona stood in the narrow aisle, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. Through the windows, she saw people running around, carrying the pilot toward the jet's door. "Get him inside," someone yelled. 2 men lifted the pilot, Paul, up the stairs. His face was gray, like old newspaper. They laid him across the leather seats in the back. A woman who said she was a nurse knelt beside him, pressing her fingers to his neck. "His pulse is weak," the nurse said. "We need to get him to that medical center. Now!" Everyone looked at Leona. She swallowed hard and walked toward the cockpit. Her legs felt like jelly, but she kept moving. The cockpit door was open. Inside, she saw a wall of buttons, switches, and screens. They glowed in different colors, red, green, blue, like a rainbow made of lights. For a moment, fear grabbed her throat and squeezed. "I can't do this," a voice in her head whispered. "I'm just a maid. I clean floors. I serve drinks. I am nobody." But then another voice came, a voice she knew better than her own, her father's voice. "Little bird," he used to say, "fear is just noise. Listen past it, and you'll hear what you need to know." Leona closed her eyes. She remembered being 8 years old, sitting in her father's lap in the cockpit of a small training plane. His big hands covered hers as they held the controls together. "This is the throttle," he had said, pointing. "It makes the engine go faster or slower. And this is the yoke. It's like a steering wheel for the sky." "What if I do it wrong, Daddy?" she had asked. "Then you try again," he had said, kissing the top of her head. "The sky is patient. It waits for brave people who are willing to learn." Leona opened her eyes. She sat down in the pilot's seat. It was too big for her, but she scooted forward until her feet could reach the pedals. Behind her, Richard Hale appeared in the cockpit doorway. His face was pale and sweaty. "Leona," he said, his voice shaking, "you don't have to do this. We can wait for the ambulance. We can wait and let him die," Leona said, not looking at Richard. Her hands moved over the controls, checking things like her father had taught her. "Or I can try." "But you're not a real pilot," Richard said. "You could crash. You could kill everyone on board." Leona's hand stopped. She turned and looked at Richard, really looked at him, his expensive suit, his silver hair, his cold eyes that were now filled with something new, fear. 3 years ago, Leona said quietly, "My father died in a crash. He was giving a lesson in a plane that your company sold to his flight school. The plane had a bad engine. The paperwork said it was fixed, but it wasn't. Your company lied to save money." Richard's face went white as snow. His name was Marcus Carter. Leona continued, "Maybe you don't remember him, but I do. And he taught me that when people need help, you don't count the cost. You just help." She turned back to the controls. "Now, please sit down and put on your seatbelt, Mr. Hale. We're going to fly." Richard stumbled backward and disappeared. Leona heard him collapse into his seat. She put on the heavy headset. It felt strange on her ears. She pressed a button and spoke into the microphone. "Tower, this is..." She paused, looking at the tail number on a card taped to the panel. "This is November 74 Bravo Whiskey. I need clearance for emergency medical transport." Static crackled. Then a voice came through, sounding surprised. 74 Bravo Whiskey, identify yourself. Where's Captain Morrison?" "Captain Morrison is a medical emergency," Leona said. Her voice was steady now, strong. I'm a trained assistant. We need immediate clearance to the Memorial Medical Center helipad." More static. Then, "Copy that. You are cleared. Wind is calm. Runway is clear. Be advised, emergency vehicles are standing by." "Thank you, Tower." Leona's hands found the throttle. She remembered. Push forward to go. Pull back to stop. Simple. Everything in flying was simple if you remembered the steps. Calm hands save lives. She flipped switches. The engine began to whine, growing louder and louder until the whole jet vibrated. The sound filled her chest, shaking her bones. Behind her, someone whimpered. It might have been Richard. Leona released a brake. The jet started rolling forward, slowly at first, then faster. The runway stretched ahead like a gray river. She pushed the throttle more. The engine roared like a living thing, powerful and wild. The speedometer climbed. 40 miles per hour. 50. 60. "You'll know when it's time to pull up," her father's voice said in her memory. "The plane will tell you. You'll feel it in your hands." 70 miles per hour. 80. The yoke began to feel lighter. The jet wanted to fly. It was asking her, begging her, "Now, little bird," her father whispered across time in death and memory. "Now you fly." Leona pulled back on the yoke. The nose lifted. The ground fell away. The jet climbed into the orange sky, leaving the air behind like it was nothing, like gravity was just a suggestion. They were flying. Leona's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. She needed to see. The medical center was only 10 minutes away, but those would be the longest 10 minutes of her life. She kept the jet steady, adjusting the controls when the nose dipped or the wings tilted. It was harder than she remembered. The jet was bigger than her father's little training plane. It fought her, testing her, but she fought back. Calm hands saved lives. "How's the patient?" she called over her shoulder. Still breathing. The nurse called back, but barely. How much longer? Leona checked the GPS screen. 5 minutes. Through the cockpit window, she saw the city below. Buildings like toy blocks. Cars like ants crawling on lines. And there, in the distance, a building with a red cross on the roof. The medical center. "I see it," she said. Landing was harder than taking off. Her father had told her that once. "Any fool can get a plane in the air," he'd said, laughing. "But bringing it down safely, that takes skill." Leona began to descend. She pulled back the throttle, feeling the engines quiet. The jet sank through the air, dropping toward the helipad on the roof. Lower, lower. The building rushed up to meet them. Leona's hands were sweating inside her grip on the yoke. The helipad looked so small, like a coin she was supposed to land on. Too fast, she thought. I'm coming in too fast. She pulled the throttle back more. The jet slowed, but now it was sinking too quickly. The building was right there, filling the windscreen. Pull up. Richard screamed from behind her. You're too low. Pull up. But Leona didn't pull up. She remembered her father's words. Trust your training. Trust your hands. Trust the plane. At the last second, she eased the yoke back, just a little. The nose lifted slightly. The wheels touched the helipad with a bump that shook everyone's teeth. They were down. The jet rolled forward a few feet and stopped. Leona sat frozen, her hands still gripping the controls, not believing what she had just done. Outside, doctors and nurses in scrubs rushed toward the jet with a stretcher. The door opened. People flooded in, moving quickly, professionally. They lifted Paul onto the stretcher and carried him away. The nurse who had stayed with him paused at the door. She looked back at Leona with tears in her eyes. "You saved his life," she said simply. Then she was gone. The jet was quiet now, empty except for Leona and Richard Hale. Richard walked slowly to the cockpit. He stood in the doorway, looking at Leona like he was seeing her for the first time. "I don't understand," he said softly. What did you learn?" Leona took off the headset. Her hands were shaking now that it was over. She stood up and faced Richard Hale, the billionaire who had mocked her, who had laughed at her, who had treated her like she was nothing. "My father taught me," she said, "before your company killed him." Richard's face crumbled. He looked old suddenly, tired, small, and Leona walked past him, out of the jet, into the evening air where the sky was turning purple and the first stars were beginning to shine. Leona stood on the helipad, breathing in the cool evening air. Her legs felt wobbly, like they might give out any second. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps. Richard Hale emerged from the jet. His silver hair was messy now. His expensive suit was wrinkled. He looked like a different person than the man who had laughed at her an hour ago. "Leona," he said. His voice cracked. "What you said about your father, Marcus Carter. I need to know, is it true?" Leona turned to face him. Her eyes were dry now. She had cried all her tears 3 years ago. "Yes," she said. "It's true." Richard stumbled to a bench near the edge of the helipad and sat down hard. He put his face in his hands. "I remember that crash," he whispered. "The investigation. The reports. My company was blamed, but we buried it. Paid people to be quiet. Made it go away." "You made my father go away," Leona said. The anger in her voice was quiet but sharp as a knife. Like he was nothing. Like his life didn't matter. "I'm sorry," Richard said. But the words sounded empty, too small for the size of what he'd done. "Sorry doesn't bring him back," Leona said. "No," Richard agreed. "It doesn't." They stood in silence. Below them, the city buzzed with life. Cars honked. People laughed. The world kept spinning like nothing had happened, like it always did. Finally, Richard looked up. His cold eyes weren't cold anymore. They were red and wet. "Why did you save the pilot?" he asked. "After what my company did to your father, you could have let Paul die. You could have walked away. Why didn't you?" Leona thought about this. She remembered her father's smile, his warm hugs, his patient voice teaching her about altimeters and airspeed and how clouds formed in different shapes. "Because my father taught me to save lives," she said quietly, "not take them, even when I'm angry, even when I'm hurt. That's what he would have wanted." Richard nodded slowly. He stood up, his body moving like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "You're a better person than I am," he said. "Better than I'll ever be." "Maybe," Leona said, "but you can change. People can always change, if they choose to." Richard looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Marcus, it's Richard Hale," he said into the phone. "I need you to pull the files on the Carter crash." "Yes, that one. Every document, every email, every payment we made to hide the truth. No, I'm not burying it deeper. I'm exposing it. All of it. Contact the Aviation Safety Board. Tell them I'm coming in tomorrow to give a full statement." He hung up. His hand was shaking. "That will destroy your company," Leona said, surprised. "Parts of it, yes," Richard said. "I'll pay fines, maybe serve time, but I have enough money to survive. Your father didn't get that choice." For the first time, Leona felt something crack inside her chest. Not anger. Something else. Something that felt almost like hope. "There's something else I want to do," Richard said. "If you'll let me." "What?" Leona asked. "I want to start a scholarship program," Richard said. For women who want to become pilots. We'll call it the Carter Wings Foundation. In your father's name. We'll train them, support them, help them fly, just like your father did. Leona's breath caught in her throat. You do that. It's the least I can do, Richard said. It won't fix what I broke. But maybe it will help build something new. Something good. Leona felt tears coming again, but this time they were different. These tears didn't hurt. He would have liked that, she said softly. My father, he loved teaching people fly. Richard nodded. Then it settled. And Leona, you'll be the first scholarship recipient. If you want to be, you'll get full training, full certification, a real pilot's license. I have a question, Leona said. Earlier, you said if I could fly the jet, you'd adopt me, make me your daughter. Richard's face went red. I was being cruel. I'm sorry. I was making fun of you, and I don't want to be your daughter, Leona interrupted. I have a father. He's gone, but he's still mine. No one can replace him. Of course, Richard said quickly. I understand. But, Leona continued, I will take that pilot training. I will fly. Not for you. For me. And for him. Richard smiled. It was a small smile, sad and tired, but real. Deal. 6 months later. The morning sun was bright and warm. Leona stood in front of a small jet, much smaller than Richard's huge plane. This one was white with blue stripes. On the side, painted in gold letters, it said, Carter Wings. Leona wore a pilot's uniform, dark blue with gold buttons. On her shoulder, 3 stripes showed her rank. Captain. She ran her hand along the jet's smooth side. It was beautiful. It was hers. Well, it belonged to the foundation. But today, she would fly it. Her first official flight as a real, certified pilot. She would fly medical supplies to a rural hospital that needed them desperately. Ready, Captain Carter? Leona turned. Richard Hale stood behind her, but he wasn't alone. 5 other women stood with him, all wearing the same student flight suits. The first class of Carter Wing scholars. Women from different places, different backgrounds, all with the same dream, to fly. Ready, Leona said. Richard handed her a clipboard. Your flight plan. Everything's in order. The weather is perfect. The sky is waiting. Leona took the clipboard. She looked at Richard. He looked older now, thinner. The investigation had been hard on him. His company had paid millions in fines. 3 executives had gone to jail. Richard himself had testified in court, admitting everything. The news called it the biggest aviation scandal in decades. But Richard was still here, still trying, still working to make things right. Thank you, Leona said. For this, for all of it. Don't thank me, Richard said. You earned this. Your father will be proud. Leona felt that familiar tightness in her chest, but it didn't hurt anymore. Now it felt warm, like her father was hugging her from wherever he was. She climbed the stairs to the jet. At the door, she paused and looked back. The 5 student pilots were watching her with wide, shining eyes. They looked at her like she was something special, something important, like she mattered. One day, Leona called down to them, you'll all have your own jets, your own flights, your own sky. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't, because you can. I promise you can. The students cheered. Richard clapped slowly, a genuine smile on his face. Leona entered the jet and closed the door. She walked to the cockpit and sat in the pilot's seat. This time, it fit perfectly. She put on her headset and flipped the switches. The engines hummed to life, purring like a giant cat. She spoke into the microphone. Tower, this is Carter Wing 01, requesting clearance for takeoff. Carter Wing 01, you are cleared. Have a good flight, Captain. Thank you, Tower. Leona's hands moved over the controls. Confident now. Practiced. She wasn't afraid anymore. The jet rolled forward. The runway stretched ahead like a path to the future. She pushed the throttle. The engines roared. Faster, faster, and then lift The wheels left the ground. The earth fell away. The sky opened up like a welcoming friend, and Leona Carter flew. She flew past the clouds. She flew past the pain. She flew past the mockery and the tears and the darkness. She flew into the light. And somewhere, in a place beyond time and sorrow, Marcus Carter watched his little bird soar. And he smiled. Epilogue. The jet bearing her father's name became a familiar sight across the country. In the months and years that followed, Carter Wings graduated over 300 women pilots. They flew cargo planes, passenger jets, medical helicopters, and air ambulances. They flew to places that needed them most. Paul Morrison, the pilot whose life Leona saved, recovered fully. He became an instructor for the Carter Wings Foundation, teaching the next generation alongside Leona. Richard Hale spent 2 years in minimum security prison for his role in covering up the safety violations. When he was released, he dedicated the rest of his life to aviation safety reform. He was never proud or arrogant again. He learned that true power isn't in money or jets or making people feel small. True power is in choosing to be better. And Leona? She flew. Every single day, she flew. Some days, she carried medicine. Some days, she carried hope. Some days, she carried young girls who dreamed of touching the clouds. But every day, no matter where she flew or who she carried her father's voice with her. Calm hands save lives. Fear is just noise. And the sky was never empty again. What would you do if you were Leona, standing on that tarmac, being mocked by a billionaire? Would you have stepped forward when the pilot collapsed? Would you have risked everything to save a stranger's life? Or would fear have kept you on the ground? Comment below with your answer. Would you have flown the jet despite the danger? Waited for help even if it meant someone might die? Confronted Richard about your father immediately? Your voice matters. Share your thoughts below, and let's talk about courage, forgiveness, and what it means to rise above mockery. If this story touched your heart, please like this story to help others find it. Share it with someone who needs to hear about courage. Subscribe for more powerful stories that prove dignity can't be bought, only earned. Because every person who's been underestimated, overlooked, or mocked deserves to know. Your moment is coming. Your sky is waiting. And when you rise, the whole world will watch in awe. Fly high, fly proud, fly like Leona.